On the last episode of Alpha, the Antonio story. Following the death of his father, Antonio overhears a conversation between his mother and a neighbor. Wilma, the neighbor, incorrectly infers that Antonio's mother is in dire straits after the death of his father. Furthermore, the assumption is that Cecil left all of his worldly possessions to the other woman. After shutting Wilma down, Antonio's mother has to face him. Antonio is bothered that his mother hasn't found it in her heart to help Brenda. Antonio's mother gave him all the information that she wanted him to have. And now, Chapter 5, Secrets. Narrated by Shandora Warren. Music by Epidemic Sound. Before you say it, yes, I understand that I was wrong across the board. First, my mother did what she felt was right, and she wasn't wrong for any of it. Even if she was wrong, she was my mother. I was a child. When I thought about it as an adult, the fact that I challenged her so strongly was almost incomprehensible. But at the time, I felt justified. Consequently, I did whatever I wanted. And I mean whatever I wanted. The thing is, my mother wasn't like some others. My friends' mothers were crying, screaming, and begging their sons to stay in line. But my mother, if there was any game to be played, I'd have to play it alone. She was not prepared to participate, nor did she pretend that she was. I remember getting suspended from school at 13 years old. It was one of several times that I had gotten into trouble that school year. That fact would have driven some other mothers crazy. But my mother, she shrugged and said, "That's on you. I already graduated." It seemed that nothing got a rise out of her, even when I stopped calling her Ma and started referring to her as Meredith. The first time I said it, she laughed and told me that I sounded just like my father. After then, she just rolled with it. My mother never deserved the treatment that I gave her. She never did a thing. She simply refused to let me drive her crazy. But once I was older, I realized something that I didn't have the capacity to understand back then. I needed something. My father had always made me feel valued and cared about. He took the time to talk to me and to make me feel heard, even when he didn't agree with my actions. That's what I needed. I think my mother's nonchalance was triggering to me. I wanted her to talk to me. I wanted her to care enough to dig into why I was acting out. Deep down somewhere, I think I wanted her to fill the void that my father left. Every time she made it obvious that she didn't care, I was triggered even more. When I became triggered, I acted out. When I acted out, my mother seemed to be unconcerned. It was a cycle that didn't work out well. Things came to a head in 1981. I was 13 years old. It was a pivotal moment that I mentally referenced at so many other points in time. When I was older and able to connect the dots, I realized that that time period was the beginning of everything. To explain, my life changed a lot. I'd always had a living father who I looked up to. He shaped and molded me. Very suddenly, he was ripped away. He had another family, and he died unexpectedly. For many, the other woman would likely have become the object of their disdain. But it was quite different for me. For some reason, a part of me felt very protective of Brenda. I'll take that back. It wasn't for some reason. I knew exactly why I felt like I needed to protect her. Something in me identified with the situation. I had lost my father, but my little sisters lost him as well. My mother had the benefit of the insurance money, but I didn't feel that Brenda had anything at all. I later realized that I was a bit naive in that regard. But because the situation looked dire, I wanted to help her. And in spite of everything, I felt that my father would want me to have a relationship with my sisters. As a result, I started to spend more time with Brenda. That may seem a bit strange, but it really wasn't at the time. In fact, my mother started dropping me off at Brenda's apartment on the weekends, at my request. They weren't friends, but they were cordial. My mother would drive to Brenda's apartment, watch me knock on the door, and quickly throw a hand up as she backed out of the parking space. Brenda always smiled stiffly and said, "Bye-bye now," as if my mother could hear her. There were some secrets between us, Brenda and me, and I think that's what made us closer. My mother only told me what she wanted me to know, but Brenda was an open book. Once I expressed the need for clarification, nothing was off limits. Brenda told me that she understood why I needed to know some things. Her only request was that I keep our conversations between us. Once I agreed, Brenda and I began to form a bond. First and foremost, my father didn't leave Brenda penniless, as we'd all assumed. Their world moved a little differently, and that will lead to another secret. But as for secret number one, my father didn't list Brenda as a beneficiary on his life insurance. How could he have? Even though he and my mother were separated, they were still married. He never changed any of the legal standings. At the time of his passing, even his car was still in both my parents' name. He did, however, leave a lump sum of cash for Brenda. It was in a safe. Brenda was very much aware that the money was not to be touched unless something happened to my father. It was a request that Brenda honored and took very seriously. And that brings me to another point. It's not exactly on the list of secrets, but I definitely think it deserves a mention for clarification. Listening to the talk, I had gathered a very specific image of who I thought Brenda was. She was presented as a young girl who had an affair with an older man. She aired the dirty laundry, naively thinking that she would take him and reap the same rewards that had been granted to the wife. But she faced a karmic and uncertain future after my father's death, likely unable to even care for her children, especially because she lacked the ambition or motivation to work. Those were the assumptions. Well, it turned out that none of that was true. Not really. My father did have quite a few years on Brenda. He was 62 years old when he died, but Brenda was no spring chicken. She was actually 40 years old. And the exposure of her relationship with my father was not due to any desire to replace my mother. It was an impulsive decision that was born out of anger. According to Brenda, she had only outed the situation because my father had refused to give her money for the girls. Being that my parents had been married for so long, she never expected my mother would make my father leave. She only sought to make life uncomfortable for him at home. Brenda never wanted my father to live with her because she had business otherwise. And by that, I mean she was sleeping with someone else. My father was an older man that she entertained when it was convenient for her. She had kids by him, and he looked out for her financially over the years. But when they were forced into a living arrangement, it wasn't comfortable for either of them. And when my father realized that Brenda had another man, their relationship turned violent. But back to the secrets. Secret number one was my father left money for Brenda. That was in the form of cash because of secret number two. It wasn't just Brenda. My father was a drug dealer as well. That's how he and Brenda met. If you know anything about the drug world, you understand that the life causes all kinds of unlikely situations to collide. Brenda met my father years earlier because she was being mentored by her uncle. Yes, her uncle was mentoring her in the distribution of drugs. It just so happened that her uncle was buying drugs from my father. He fell ill, and Brenda was tasked with making the pickups. They developed a relationship, and the rest was history. That had been 10 years prior to that point. Brenda was 30, and my father was 52. Hearing those things put a lot into perspective for me. I had entered Brenda's life at a very specific time. I saw how my mother talked to her, and she didn't present a challenge. Brenda appeared to be beat down by life when I first met her. Her eyes were swollen, as if she had been crying. I heard my father fight Brenda, and her only plea was that he spare the children from bearing witness. It was easy to assume that she was weak. But after hearing and seeing it all, I realized that Brenda was no damsel in distress. She was a boss. She had always been. Brenda was mad at life. She was stuck with a 62-year-old man, and he had his foot in the door just enough to keep her from doing anything else. On top of that, he had nothing better to do but to put his hands on her. Brenda could have fought him back, but she felt that de-escalating the situation was the best thing for her kids. Brenda made money. Sometimes she made a lot of it. She had her own system. She made her own money, and the men didn't play with her. That was impressive in the 80s. Additionally, Brenda had her head on straight. There were drug dealers that were falling victim to the crack epidemic. They were curious, and they wanted to know what the hype was about. But Brenda was as straight as an arrow. She didn't touch anything, not even down to weed. Brenda always told me that hustling required a clear headspace. And that led to secret number 3. My father didn't have a clear headspace. According to Brenda, he had been dabbling in drugs for years. On the night he died, my father had come into the apartment high on cocaine that had likely contributed to the accident that took his life. I wondered how much my mother knew. Would finding out his secrets make things better or worse? Oh yeah, there was another secret. Brenda was teaching me the game. That probably should have been at the top of the list. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Shinny Tells a Story on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to purchase books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and some in hardback formats. Please like and follow this podcast and share it with your friends, family, and frenemies, because all relationships matter, even the toxic ones. Thank you so much for helping me to create the world that I want to see. This is my 10th book. Oh yeah, you're welcome.